Welcome to Team Futurism. Today I'm interviewing Naum Milyavskiy, who is a writer and filmmaker based in Los Angeles. We are recording this the day after the election. So the election results just dropped this morning. I hate to say it. There's no way we can't not at least talk about it, just at least for half a second. I promise we won't make this whole thing about this. But Naum, I want to ask you one just quick question. And then again, I swear we don't have to talk about it. This is a time when I am personally reflecting on what could be positive coming out of this new, like to me, kind of like shocking result. Is there anything positive that you see? What culturally is going to be happening coming out of the Trump administration 2025?
Man, that's a big question. I was with a friend and she asked me, like, are you nervous about the election?
Mm-hmm.
And she was clearly nervous and I wasn't as nervous. And the reason is I think the first Trump presidency like brought some demons to light about things we're contending with as a country, about certain groups kind of losing power, losing their sense of power in this country.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the country's better for it after having confronted some of those demons, but I would much rather the difficult things we're contending with come out of the darkness and surface for us to have a dialogue about it. So my kind of whole take on this like kind of tragic day for so many people is that things are emerging again and they haven't disappeared, and I think we have to contend with it. So the positive kind of silver lining I'm seeing is like their fears and paranoias and suspicions and some discontent that we have to wrestle with. And I'm hoping like we find ways to do that, if that makes sense.
I like that. Yeah. So positivity might emerge out of the darkness. I like that. And I will leave it there. I do have a lot of thoughts, but none of them make any sense at the moment because I haven't had a chance to process much.
Right.
But no, I like that. I think that's fair
I hope
enough.
that wasn't too vague because
It's appropriately vague. I will say that. It's appropriately vague. Speaking of being vague, this is actually a great segue because today I want to talk to you about that interview that Jordan Peterson had with Richard Dawkins. And this is kind of near and dear to both of our hearts because we are both writers. We write screenplays. Anybody who writes screenplays dabbles in like archetypes and has a lot to say about that sort of thing and the power of story, etc. And especially like coming from a futurist angle, I do kind of sort of believe that a lot of radical technologies wouldn't exist if it weren't for sci-fi and people, using fiction to inspire them to create things in the real world. I think that there's a lot there. And so I think that it is like a futurist topic at some level. I am going to, for the listeners, drop in a clip to kick off this conversation of Jordan Peterson talking to Dawkins about dragons and symbolism. I'm going to drop that in right here.
It's the dragon fight too.
Well, how many dragons have
Satan.
you overcome in your life?
I'm not interested in dragons. I'm interested in reality.
Okay, so I read a book a while back that described the biological reality of the dragon. Say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, okay, is there such a thing as a predator?
Of course.
Well, that's a meta category. What's the category of predator? Bear, eagle, if you're a primate. Fire? Is fire a predator?
No.
Well, it's complicated because a fire kills you. So is there a worse predator than serpentine, flying, fire-breathing reptile? Is that not the imagistic equivalent of predator? So in what way, if predator is real, in what way isn't dragon real?
I don't know why you say dragon. I mean, we have lions, we have tigers, we have saber-tooths.
Right, but why not abstract?
So a dragon is a pictorial representation of the abstracted concept of a predator.
Yes.
As you say, we already have the term predator, and so it might be useful in art, in narrative, but when you say the biology of a dragon, you must understand how that can be misleading.
I don't think the category of dragon is any less valid than the category of lion.
Any less biological?
Well, it depends on your level of analysis.
You would say that lions are an instantiation of this bracket term of predator.
I would also say...
Would you therefore say that a lion is an instantiation of the bracket term of dragon?
Yes.
Okay, so now where do you fall on this conversation? Are you closer to Dawkins just to level set, or are you closer to Peterson?
Well, as an artist and not a scientist, I think I'm definitely closer to Jordan Peterson. There's a quote by Ursula Le Guin, actually, that might help frame my answer. It's from her book, Language of the Night, that I recommended you read. It's a collection of essays that she's written about writing. And one of her sort of injunctions to writers is to journey into the inner lands. Journey into the inner lands. And in the inner lands for me has become shorthand for like things that exist inside of you that you can't see. And so I think that I think that the debate between Dawkins and Peterson boils down to, is it only real if you can see it?
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen a dragon in real life, but the kind of concept of a dragon, or the existence of some fearful, large, menacing thing that keeps me up at night, that kind of makes its way into my dreams and kind of makes me feel, you know, a pin in my stomach, is very real. I'm sure we've all felt it from like grade school on into our adult lives. So I think what Peterson's getting at is that there are these concepts and reoccurring sort of characters or entities that manifest as dragons, but they honestly are just like this category for big monstrous things we have to contend with.
Okay, so what is the difference between that, what you just said, and this idea of like the power of story, et cetera, and Jordan Peterson's reliance on like the Bible and these big symbols? What's the difference between that and other types of, people might call it like magical mumbo jumbo, like astrology, you know? Like, what's the difference between like determining how you go about your day based on astrology versus relying on like ancient stories to go about your day? Is there a difference?
Yeah. So I think Dawkins is part of a camp of rationalists that includes like Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, who passed away recently. They're the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They're like known as like atheists who argue very fiercely for atheism. And I think they all are very literal about the facts in the world that we should include and exclude. And they're all really grounded in science, empirical science, which is great for science. The only issue is there are truths that connect with people that are hard to explain and hard to test empirically, but that we all feel kind of exist inside of us. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's like a large enough phenomenon where like we all kind of feel and resonate with these stories that they have a reality outside of like, you know, something you can measure with a ruler or with a microscope.
It's interesting to me that Peterson seems to get Richard Dawkins' world. He seems to get where he's coming from, whereas Dawkins seems to not get where Peterson comes from. He seems to think that, yeah, like maybe, like he even, I think, said in the full interview, like, I do kind of get it, but I don't think it's very interesting. I don't see the value in it. And so, like, I kind of see that in the sense that anyone can make up any story that they want. Like, small children make up stories, and like 99.9% of the stories that we interact with day to day, they are just kind of like, they don't actually influence our behavior necessarily. And then the 1%, I'm just like throwing this out here, the 1%, like let's say like Dawkins might argue this, the 1% that do influence our lives, half of those might be negative. Like you know, Trump plants a story that the election was stolen. He says that enough that it becomes like real, like actual, like real to so many people, even though it's just a story that he told, right? And so like stories can be good and bad. Most of them aren't impactful, and then a lot of them in that mix is just kind of like nonsense. So like, how do we get value out of this thing, assuming that there can be some value there?
I think that there's a discomfort in the realm of science if you kind of want everything to fall under a truth or falsity value. If you want everything to just, if you equate everything with a true and false value, or you kind of value it with truth or falsity in the empirical sense, your world is very gray, or I guess black and white. Yeah, I think what you're getting at is that we live in a world of misinformation, and facts are harder to claim and harder to prove, and more people can contest them. And this idea of subjective truth, if it comes from like a political narrative, can be dangerous because suddenly we don't have a level ground on which we can like debate ideas with reason. I mean, but are Ursula Le Guin and Stephen King and Jordan Peele doing the same thing as Donald Trump is, right? Like, or like a, you know,
They're presenting themselves as fiction authors, whereas he is presenting himself as straight-laced politician. So, but he's playing a character in a way that they're honestly representing themselves as fiction authors. So yeah, it is different. It's different.
Right. So I think if I had to put it in like a sentence, like Trump is claiming truth and using fictions, and authors step into fiction to find the truths within those stories. It's like almost inverted in a way.
One of the things that I think is interesting about the idea of ancient mythology or biblical stories or even like Marvel movies or etc. Is that I think that by engaging with the fictional content in those stories, or Peterson likes to talk about Crime and Punishment with Raskolnikov, by engaging with that fiction, I think that it's the engagement process that lets you arrive at some sort of like deeper meanings. I don't even want to say truths necessarily, but like deeper meanings or impactful meanings, rather than just like consuming the content by itself. And so Peterson does this. He very actively engages with like Old Testament stories, right? And it's through that engagement that he arrives somewhere. And that's, I think, maybe where Dawkins has failed in this conversation, and where he just fails with engaging with this world in general, like anyone religious, is I think that he doesn't actively engage enough with the content itself. And so, for example, he says that the idea of like sacrificing an animal and sacrificing a Messiah, it seems bad. And then he doesn't like, he just like ends there. He could spell that out about how we don't want as a society to have our foundational myth around like slaughtering innocent animals so that we can live out our lives. I mean, like this is one of the things that sorry to rant about this, but Peter Thiel said that Donald Trump is a sacrificial lamb, in the sense that like he will be slaughtered, and through by like liberalism and leftism, he'll be slaughtered, and out of that like something will arise, just like parallel to Jesus being slaughtered innocently, and other things will arise. He's like the scapegoat, right? And like maybe that's just like a bad framework for society, and you could maybe explain why, maybe even using Trump as an example there. But like Dawkins just doesn't even go to that level. He doesn't even engage at all. I think that's a little bit of a failing on his part.
Yeah, I mean, I used to love Dawkins. I used to really be a literalist, a scientific, you know, rationalist. There was a moment where I fell out of favor with religion early on in my life and joined the kind of literalist, rationalist camp. And then there was just so much nuance that was missing. Like, if you take the story of Abraham and Isaac, which is what you're referring to, right? The biblical sacrifice of Isaac. And you kind of read like this delusional, pathological story of like an older man listening to voices and, you know, about to kill his son. I think you're missing, the readings that allow you to kind of see that story as like understanding what sacrifice means in general, right? I guess in one way it's metaphorical, right? What does it mean to have an ideal or a cause that you feel you need to sacrifice everything to? And I think in that language of the Bible, what's more dear to you than your like only son, right? Your firstborn son, right? So it's like asking to take your progeny, your child, and like put that on the line for something you think may be the most important thing in the world, right? And when you read it under that light, it starts to become a richer story. And I'm not saying the Bible's the only story that can do this for us. I actually think it's just one among many, and I prefer like sci-fi most of the time.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it misses an important reoccurring theme, which is the sacrifice in general.
So, do you find it problematic, though, that Peterson won't give straight answers to questions like, was the virgin birth real? Did Jesus really die for our sins and go to heaven? For Christians, that matters a lot. And I'm surprised Christians don't take more issue with this, honestly. But I mean, from Dawkins' perspective, like, that just seems dishonest to like not even give a straight answer to that. It seems like he is playing a game and not like being even true to the conversation, like the terms of the conversation, right? But what do you think? Do you think that like he needs to give straight answers to those questions?
I mean, there's a subsection of the population that's going to read the Bible and be fundamentalists and are going to read those events as historical and instructive in this really literal way.
Mhm.
Like, if they heard voices, they would also like sacrifice their sons. Like, I'm sure those people exist. I think that's the liability that they're hedging against, like Dawkins and all of these like kind of rationalists. I don't know. I think Jordan Peterson.
I mean, I think Dawkins is like literally upset that you can't just say, no, I don't think the virgin birth happened because that's silly and it's clearly fiction. Like, I think that he's just irritated that an intellectual like professor can't just say those words.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think I don't probably wouldn't be on board with Peterson with that too. But Peterson's kind of trying to make a statement, and he's trying to challenge our idea of what's fiction and what's fact, because it's
Right.
so clean in Dawkins' mind, and it's not clean in Peterson's mind. And so he's trying to kind of rip that idea of truth, like kind of out of Dawkins's context. Like he wants to redefine what it means to be true. So I see what he does, but I don't think I'd do the same thing.
We live in stories. That's like a fundamental, like absolute truth, right? Like the way that we engage with the world, just the way that our minds work for whatever reason, it's we have this we interact with the world through language, etc. And metaphors get layered on top of that, and that's how we have everything that we have. Every concept that we have is through the beauty of language, which just happens to only flower and blossom through stories. One thing, did you watch the full interview between Dawkins and Peterson?
I did not.
Okay, so to me, the most interesting part of the whole interview was when Peterson went on a rant, and I've heard other people do the same thing. This wasn't like, I don't think his original idea, but about how science itself and Dawkins doing science, having the privilege to do science and being lauded for it, it only exists because the Christian framework made it so that we as human beings believed that there was order and structure in the world, and that made it so that we had the thought planted in our brains that, oh, the world is orderly, so we can figure out how it works. Like a lot of parts of the world pre Judeo-Christian stuff, like they thought that the world was chaos, and so they never bothered to like look into it. Whereas like Europe happened to just be Judeo-Christian, and because of that, science blossomed out of that. It's not a coincidence, you would argue, it's because of this. And Dawkins kind of like agreed with him there and was like, yeah, probably that's probably true. And if even just given that, if that is true, that's maybe the most powerful thing stories have ever done for us, is like this story just happened to justify us seeking knowledge in a way that gave us the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
So like that's a huge win for the story side of the ledger.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up an interesting question because we don't really understand the ground we stand on, like philosophically, in our time. It's really hard for us to see the things we've taken for granted until that's all overturned and we have a new system. Like, no one questioned the divine right of kings, like during the height of the British monarchy. It's just kind of like how the world worked. Like God had a deputy, and that deputy was the king, and it was like unheard of to like, murder that deputy of justice and of light, of divinity, of truth. So it's only when we're out of it and we've kind of moved on to the next paradigm that we can see the full arc. So I know it's kind of interesting that you say that, like, we've derived from this kind of religious culture, because I don't think we fully understand how. And I think Peterson might be on the cusp of trying to understand how, and that's probably what he's drawing Dawkins' attention to. The issue I do have now with Dawkins and Sam Harris is that they don't cede any ground to religious thinking, and when they do, it's only when it's a source of bringing us to a rationalist perspective. But they kind of cut the rope after they've climbed it and go, that rope's not important anymore. We're standing on the ground of rationalism now. But it's like, isn't the rope instrumental to like forming the rationalist perspective in the first place? They're kind of embedded. So I don't know if you can cut the rope entirely.
Yeah, that's all very interesting. I do think, to Dawkins' credit, and to religious people's discredit, a big thing today is like, how do you have meaning and purpose without religion? This is like a big criticism that I think that you're even kind of like, pointing to there. Without religion, how do you have meaning and purpose in life? And so there's this like meaning crisis that people talk about. I actually just recently saw Dawkins in San Francisco when he was doing his last book tour of America. And this got brought up, and he just said, and I've heard him say this before in interviews, that life, guys, is like supremely amazing and just chock full of meaning. Just like look at the stars and think for half a second about your place in the universe and how amazing it is to be alive. And he has this little rant that's more poetic and beautiful than I can do right now, but it's like, it's so inspiring. And like, frankly, I do think that is more inspiring than Jesus died on the sin-sphere cross and you have to like pray to some deity there's zero evidence that exists for, and that gives you meaning. Why? Because your parents told you so, and because their parents told them so, and it's in this ancient book that like 99% of the historical facts in it aren't true, and so like there's also like angels and demons, also not true. And it's like at some level, if I'm gonna like base my sense of meaning and purpose on life on something, it's gonna be like shit that's real, right? It's not gonna be shit that's like fundamentally not true. There's a truth in there, I will say, that you get out of Marvel movies or any other story. There's some truth there, but that is like real or whatever. But like, I'm not starting with that shit. I'm starting with it like, holy shit, it's crazy to be alive. It's crazy to have consciousness. It's crazy to be like knowing where I'm at in history in relation to plants and animals and the sun us going around the sun, etc. Like, I'm grounding myself there, and then I'm gonna plant stories on top of that to kind of like give it color and nuance. You know what I'm saying? I know other people like maybe will not resonate with that, but man, that resonates hard for me. And that is like, so why I still am to this day on team Harris Dawkins, even though I have a lot of time for this story stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I try not to have, one, it's not like red versus blue, like, truth versus fiction. It's not like so clear cut to me. I don't want to make it seem like I'm on one side or the other, but I just see what both sides might be missing. I guess that's where I kind of insert myself in the discussion. And I think that it's great to see all of the tangible scientific facts of the world and the unlikelihoods and Stephen Hawking's, lectures on the probability of us existing and the infinitude of space. That's all awe-inspiring. But I don't think my personal sense of spirituality is purely derived from scientific observable facts. And I build in a little bit room of the mystery and the unknown and of the intangibles. And I don't see people like Dawkins leaving room for that. And so my intuition kind of steers me to look for something else.
Yeah, I really do wonder if Dawkins has the sort of mind where he can read a great novel and put himself into the story, right? I kind of get the sense that he can't, or even when he's watching a movie, he's thinking about like, what sort of lens did they put on this camera, and like, how did the lighting system work? You know what I mean? I don't feel like he's like, I'm Tom Cruise now and I'm seeing myself on this train. You know what I mean? I feel like he doesn't relate to story, like get engaged with stories in that way, maybe necessarily, which this actually brings me to my next question, which
Yeah.
is when you go about writing a story or crafting a story. I know that you're working on some documentaries right now. Uh, how do you use these tools that Peterson describes, or um, what's the hero in the Thousand Faces guy? What's his name?
Joseph Campbell.
Or Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you use those tools, and what do you hope to give to modern audiences that you think that they can't get out of science and biology?
That's a great question. Also a big question.
Good
You're
question. It is.
You're full of. I, documentary is tricky because it's just more kind of like journalism. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of journalism that I kind of come to documentary with, but I'm working on a sci-fi concept, and that's where I think the kind of Campbell and Young and the archetypes come in, and Peterson possibly. Here's my take on working on a sci-fi and using like this approach. If I sit down and I want to create a science fiction fantasy world, the possibilities are infinite, like literally. Like I can make anything up. I can stitch together anything. I can create any kind of character, any kind of plot arc, any kind of character growth. And it feels kind of scary to not have rails. What kind of story would I make if I can cut something from whole cloth in my imagination? What are the rules? And in my own process of working on my sci-fi, I found the story kind of starts to take a natural shape and characters start to emerge. And of course, that's informed by the media I've consumed in my life that I've unconsciously or consciously integrated into my work. But after having done a lot of research and a lot of reading into process, including Tolkien's fantasy, who's like a huge inspiration for me, J.R. Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings. I've discovered that like there are these rough things that kind of show up and grab my attention and have grabbed the attention of people that I've been influenced by. We all kind of glom onto the same kinds of stories or same kind of characters. And in my own process, I find that super reassuring because it means I'm not just groping in the dark and making up things randomly. It's invented and it's artifice, but there's this kind of greater scaffolding of truth that I've like found as I navigate the possibility of writing a sci-fi.
So we've talked about, or you were sending me some material about how writers are starting to use more and more AI in the writing process. And I know that you have been using some, and I want to talk to you about that a little bit. But one of the things that you sent me, which I think is so interesting, is that when individuals use AI to help with their story writing, it actually makes them more creative. But when a group of people, like if you take 20 people and they all use AI, as a group, they get less creative. There's less variability because AI is kind of channeling these probably same exact archetypes, right? Whereas if you let 20 people go out about their, do their thing, just using their brain power and all of their life experience, it's going to be way more chaotic and random. And out of that chaotic randomness, there might emerge new archetypes, right? Like it's not like we're done creating archetypes. We can create new things or amalgamations of them or pastiches of them. What do you think about that? And does that concern you at all about the future of the arts if AI does have a flattening effect?
Yeah, I mean, the story of like what AI is going to do to like our creative lives is still being written. Like it's just so fresh, right? I think that what AI does generally in all of its manifestations right now, whether it's large language models or image generators, I think is it like slots things into convenient molds that we've already created.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So
yeah.
if I use ChatGPT to write a story, it's going to go, oh, I see, you're going after a Matrix-like story, and it's going to nudge me in that direction the entire way.
Right.
So if I don't know how to write a Matrix-like story, or I don't even know what story I want to write, I just want to write about the prison-like technology that we live in, it's going to be like, why don't you try a Matrix story? That's a good one.
Right.
And I'm going to feel like a god using it because it's going to like take my crumbs of creative thinking and it's going to turn those into castles. So I think what AI does generally, and I think I'm answering your question, is it like lifts, it lowers the bar so that more people can get on and be creative, but I don't think it raises the ceiling.
Okay, yeah, that totally tracks. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, you're not gonna get a Stephen King go here. Now you have AI, and it's not gonna like amplify his abilities necessarily. I think it might, if he's stuck on a story for whatever reason, like probably he does. He it happens to him, I'm sure. It might help him out of that rut, but I don't think it's gonna write the next classic book. Because yeah, this might be going into other topics, but I think what artists do generally is they sense the ambient signals society's creating around them, and they kind of absorb it and channel it into something that connects with the culture. And that's like really something a machine doesn't do. It's kind of, the machines kind of take what's in the rear view and they project it forward onto the road. It's like, okay, we've done the Matrix. You think the second Matrix, the new Matrix of our time is going to be the Matrix? No, it's going to be a new thing. And I don't think AI can conjure that up for us.
I mean, this is one thing that I think is good about AI, is that I do think it's an art killer. And I think that it's good for art to be killed because then we do get to move on from certain things. And so I actually recently wrote an article about how there's this one type of literary kind of like quirky genre that is just dead now. It's just so dead. I was in the library a couple months ago and I picked up a book of this guy who had written this very clever, funny book that was, I think it was Star Wars written as if it were written by Shakespeare. And so it's like written as a play, but it's like the Star Wars story with the characters. And, you know, it's very quirky and fun. Probably was very hard to write because he had to like get that style in his brain and just like do it. And then checked out this book, went home, and then like, of course, got on ChatGPT and was like, you know, playing around with it to do this. I was like, write Napoleon Dynamite, the opening pages as a Shakespeare play, right? And just spits it out. And I compared it, it's just as funny and just as like well written, quote unquote, as the guy whose book I picked up in the library, right? That's just done. Like that gimmicky type of book, it's great. It had its moments, probably had some fans, he probably sold some copies and made a career out of it at some level, but like you just can't do that anymore because like it's just like conquered. It's just conquered, and there's nothing that you can do that you can bring to that because it is so fundamentally just kind of like algorithm based. That game he's playing, it's an algorithm, right? So yeah, I think that's actually maybe a good thing because now that particular writer, hopefully, pray to God, is like now doing other things with his time and maybe inventing new things that won't be taken out by AI.
I think both of us are like on the same side of this kind of AI wave, which is probably controversial. But I think some people are clutching like the past and they're not trying to let go of their model of what art is or what art product should be. And so any kind of territory ceded over to like AI is going to be bad. Like, yeah. But you and I don't see
those
that.
People are going to lose, though.
I mean,
so
I don't
hop on board to our team because, like, you don't want to be a loser team.
But you know, like, you almost sound fascist, going like, "This is the new thing." Like, I'm not a tech. Right. I'm not like, what do you call, like, an accelerationist. I don't think AI is going to be the coming of the new messiah, and we need to pass the torch of civilization to like technology, whatever. Like all the high fantasy. I mean, it's more religion, but you know, like the Peter Thiels and Ray Kurzweil.
Oh yeah, Ray Kurzweil too. Yeah.
These people kind of give like a messianic significance to technology that I don't think either of us have, and I think that's far. But I do think that if you're resisting the wave, you're gonna get crushed underneath it.